So this is the second webinar hosted by SATS. And we are very glad that Victor and Stefan can be joining us today. So today, Victor will inform us how sleeping can boost our recovery. And Stefan will end this webinar to introduce and to kick off the second round of Electrolux Challenge. So during this webinar, if you have questions, please write them in the chat box. And we will send all the questions to Victor, so you will have a lot to do after this and to answer them. And then we will post them on eGate, so you will have all the answers. Because Victor will use all these minutes that we have. So let's start, Victor, and the screen is yours.
Thank you, Malin. First off, I just want to say that it feels great to be here. I'm really excited. The timing of this presentation couldn't be any better because my refrigerator just broke down. So I'm really hoping to find someone who can set me up with a nice discount. So if you know somebody that knows somebody, please hit me up after this presentation. But before we get there, we are going to talk about a topic today that makes up a pretty big part of our lives. And it's something that often gets neglected as we have many other things to do over the course of the day. We're going to talk about sleep. And what I want you guys to walk away with after this presentation is to realize the true value of sleep and how you can improve your health and well-being just by prioritizing your sleep. Now, the reason why I'm so passionate about this subject is because I've had some severe sleep problems myself. And this started about 5 years ago as I was literally working my way through a relationship. So during my last year at university, I remember having about 3 different jobs, just so busy as I was going in to write my bachelor thesis. Now, I would stay up pretty late working until I fall asleep. And at the time, I was also working as a DJ. And I recall waking up during the week as well. And at first, I didn't see this as a problem, so I just keep on working. But it didn't take me long until I started to see some effects on my body myself. And I remember at one point starting to actually see myself losing hair. I was gaining weight while losing muscle. I also experienced some problems with my heart. I had problems getting my heart rate up and had problems doing things at moderate intensity. And that's when I kind of realized that I had to change. And what I'm hoping to, what I want you guys to walk away with, or at least encourage you guys to, is that some of this material in this presentation is going to spark you to take more action to your own health. So what we're going to focus on today is we're going to talk a little about this.
Victor, sorry for interrupting you, but you need to stand. You need to stand still before.
Sorry.
So you can't move because the sound gets a little bit bad then. So please.
Thank you, Molly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Molly.
Yeah.
I only thought you could see my presentation. I must stand still. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
And maybe also a little bit closer. Sorry.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks for the coaching. I needed that. Besides talking about, we're going to focus on talking about a little bit about the sleep restrictions and now the short-term effects of them. But we're also going to talk a little bit about how we can benefit from sleeping more. Before we get off here, we're also going to talk about how you can improve your sleep quality. Make sure that you're getting the best sleep, or the sleep that you're actually getting. Now, as we start, we should note that sleep problems is a huge problem in our society today. Almost 40% of Swedes are having problems with their sleep. These are numbers coming from a survey done in 2018, done by the Swedish Health Agency. In these reports, it states that women are overrepresented in sleep complaints compared to men. Not only that, but women also seems to have more severe problems with their sleep compared to men. If we take a look at how this change has been going on for the last couple of years, we know that we can see a trend where we see that the numbers of sleep complaints has increased during the last couple of years. And it's important for us to really take action now before this gets any worse. But if we want to fix our sleep, we need to know what it is. And the best way to describe sleep is really to describe it in a way where it's the time during the day when both our body and our brain gets a chance to recover and process the information and input that is been given over the course of the day. So when we sleep, we move from a stage of where our brain goes from high frequencies to low frequencies. At the same time, our body goes from a stage of moving to being completely paralyzed, while our mind is going from being in this deep anabolic sleep, moving into REM sleep, where we are dreaming. Now, these changes happens many times over the course of the night in different cycles, sleep cycles are called. And they last everywhere from 90 to 120 minutes. And if we take a look at the picture on the screen, we can see that during the first half of the night, we're spending more time in our deep sleep, non-REM, especially the stage 3 and stage 4 part of our sleep. This is associated with our deep sleep, and it's most of the restorative processes are happening in this part of our night. If we look at the later half of the night, we can see that we're spending more time in our REM sleep. If we were to cut the night short, we'd probably lose out on some of our REM sleep. And previously, the value of REM sleep has been neglected, something that we don't really need it as long as we get our deep sleep. But what we now know is that we need both. And our REM sleep seems to be important not only for our cognitive function, but also for our memory. But we'll get back to that later on. Now, how much you need to sleep depends from person to person, and it also varies throughout life. But the recommendation is anywhere from 7 to 9 hours for a healthy adult. Now, many of us struggle to meet these recommendations on a day-to-day basis, but we know now that in our modern society today, we're actually sleeping less than we did a few centuries ago, or a few generations ago. And this change has been going on for about 100 years, ever since we moved from agricultural societies, moving into work in factories. We've been slowly but surely finding reasons to stay up longer into the night. And with the later advancements in technology, we're now able to be available online from anywhere at any time. We might see this trend progress if we don't address this issue. And when we're talking about sleep deprivation, it's important to make the distinction between total sleep deprivation and partial sleep restriction, where total sleep deprivation is the effects of not sleeping at all, which we know will get us killed in only a matter of 2 or 3 weeks or less. But what we don't talk about as often is the effects of sleep restriction. Cut the night short just by a little bit of a longer period of time. And we know that chronic sleep restriction is associated with a higher risk of facing overall mortality, depression, several metabolic syndromes, and also cardiovascular diseases. Some of the short-term effects of sleep restriction that may lead up to these is that we know that when we sleep less, it impairs our metabolism, it changes our relationship to food, but it also increases the risk for infection and diseases, while at the same time it does have a negative impact on our mental capabilities, cognitive function. But so how does sleep or sleeping less affect our metabolism? In this meta-analysis from 2017, Al-Khatib and colleagues included 41 different studies who had examined the effects of how much sleep test subjects were getting when they had free access to food. And they compared short sleepers and long sleepers who were allowed to sleep anywhere from 3.5 hours up to 5.5 hours, comparing that with people who slept anywhere from 7 to 10 hours. What they found was that as we slept less, we had a tendency to eat upwards of about 250 calories more each day. Now, this may not sound like a lot, but if we were to maintain this behavior for 10 weeks, it would result in a weight gain that would equivalent about 2.5 kilos. If we were to maintain that for a whole year, it would probably result in a weight gain equivalent to 12.5 kilos. Now, it's interesting to know why these changes are taking place. And an easy explanation would be to say, well, okay, if people are sleeping less, aren't they also spending more energy? But in this case, they couldn't see any significant changes between the long sleepers and the short sleepers, meaning that they spend about the same amount of energy, but somehow the people who slept less still ate more. A part of the explanation might lie in the physiological changes that we see. And we know that when we sleep less, we can see our leptin, our satiety hormone, decrease. So it's hormone that's signaling.
Sorry, I'm interrupting you again. Can you take one further step closer to
the camera? All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh,
I appreciate the coaching because thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you, Molly.
Yeah.
Let me know if I need to go back and forth. But we can see these decreases in our leptin, our satiety hormone, which signals our body that we're full and that we're not hungry. At the same time, we also see that a spike in our hunger hormone, ghrelin, which signals our body that we're hungry. And altogether, this may cause us to eat even more. What we also know is that when we sleep less, our brain is affected by this. And especially the reward center in our brain gets upregulated, meaning that as we go more tired, we have a bigger tendency to eat more based out of our desires rather than hunger. And this is also a reason why we might see some macronutrient changes in our diet, where we see as we sleep less, we have a tendency to eat more fat, less protein. And this might also be an explanation of why we're seeing the increased energy intake, as fat is a more energy-dense source of energy than protein. Altogether, sleep seems to make us not only eat more, but possibly worse. Now, what's cool about this is that we actually see the reverse effects when we allow people to sleep more. In another meta-analysis from Henst and colleagues, 2019, they reviewed studies who allowed people to sleep anywhere from 20 minutes up to 3 hours more. In some cases, they were accompanied with sleep hygiene protocols for how they could improve their sleep quality. And what they saw here was not only did they see indirect and direct improvements of insulin sensitivity, but they also saw reductions in appetite and in energy intake. So if we want to stay one step ahead of ever getting these cardiovascular and metabolic syndromes, sleep seems to be a preventative measure that you don't want to miss out on. But it's not only our metabolism that is affected by our sleep, it's also our immune system. And in another study from 2015, Prather and colleagues sampled 164 men and women where they monitored their sleep for 7 days before exposing them to a rhinovirus through nasal drops. And what they did after that was that they followed up to see how many of these people actually developed a clinical cold after exposure to the virus. What they did was they divided the people into 4 different groups based upon how much they had been sleeping until the point where they got their exposure to the virus. And the results speaks for themselves. In the case where the people had slept any less than 5 hours or 5 to 6 hours, they were at a significantly higher risk of developing a cold compared to the people sleeping 7 hours or more. And what's really interesting about this is that this stays true independently of pre-level antibodies before getting exposure to the virus, meaning that no matter how much antibodies they had in their system before getting exposed to the virus, didn't seem to make make up for the difference in sleep. And this was also true for mammography, BMI, and other health practices. So if we want to keep our immune system in shape, sleep is something that we can't afford to miss out on. This study from 2003, Van Donnier and colleagues examined how our access to sleep affected our cognitive functioning, our mental capabilities. What they did here was that they had a sample of 48 people who they divided into 4 different groups. One group who weren't allowed to sleep at all for 3 days. and 3 other groups that were allowed to sleep anywhere from 4 to 8 hours. They tested the test subjects in different cognitive tests, such as alertness, working memory, addition and subtraction, and perceived radius of fatigue, how tired they were. And what they found was that they could see, and they found an almost linear relationship between time spent awake after 16 hours, either in one go or accumulated across different days, and the number of incorrect answers in alertness tests. So what this tells us, with this information, it gives us a chance to predict how well you're going to perform in certain tests based upon how long you've been awake or how much you've been sleeping. What they also found in this study was that the group who slept more clearly outperformed the other groups in all different tests, whether it be alertness, working memory, addition and subtraction. But what they did find as well was that it didn't seem to be such a big difference between the 4-hour group, 6-hour group, when comparing how tired they rated themselves. So if we take a look at square B, we can see that the 2 lines for the 4-hour and 6-hour group are almost intersecting. And it seems that the curve is also hitting a plateau only after a few days. So in this case, kind of tells us that there is almost like a ceiling of tiredness. So we get tired up to a certain point. But what's also important to notice is that as they're hitting this ceiling, it doesn't correlate with the ever ongoing performance impairments that we can see in the alertness test in square A. So if we were to rate our readiness based upon how tired we feel, we might overestimate our capability to perform certain tasks. To put this in perspective, in this study, the group sleeping 6 hours would, over the course of these 14 days, perform at the level of someone who hadn't slept at all for 48 hours. That's pretty bad. But how bad is it? We know that someone who sleeps 17 to 19, hasn't slept for 17 to 19 hours, performs at the level of someone who has 0.5 per ml alcohol in their blood. Do you guys know where the limit for drunk driving in Sweden goes? It's at 0.2. So we can only imagine in what shape someone would be if they hadn't slept for 48 hours, or in this case, if they were allowed to sleep upwards of 6 hours a day. Now, based off of this information, I want you guys to think of a everyday scenario where this might be a problem. Maybe it's towards you or the people around you, an everyday example. It could be at work, it could be going to work. Some of you might have guessed it by now, but I'm talking about traffic. In Sweden, around 200 people die annually in car accidents. And somewhere between, it's estimated that 15 to 30% of these accidents are a result of people not getting enough sleep. And what we also know now is that during spring, as we go into Earth Light Savings Day, when we pull the clock back an hour, the week following that, we can see a spike of upwards of 30% more fatal car accident as a result of us pulling back the clock, not making sure that people get enough sleep. And these are numbers that we have the chance to address if we start taking our sleep more seriously. Now, we're gonna take a quick break. What I want you guys to do is to bring out a pen and a paper and try to fill out this quiz. We're going to give you guys exactly 3 minutes to finish up this test, and then afterwards we're going to go back into our presentation. 3 minutes starting now, and see you soon. All right, I'm gonna go back. So when it comes to improving our health, it really goes back to knowing ourselves and what works for you, and making sure that we stick with it, whether you be a night owl or an early bird. By having clear intention of why we're doing certain things, we can create systems that makes it easier for us to fall in line with good habits. And if we want to improve our health and well-being, our sleep should be one of our first priorities. Now, we're going to face times where we can't do anything about the amount of time that we're sleeping, but especially if we're parents, we have kids, we have many other things that we need to do. But there's still things that we can do to get the most out of sleep that we're actually getting. And in this case, we're talking about sleep quality. Now, if we want to improve how we're sleeping, we should try to help the system that actually takes care of when we're sleeping and when we're not. The thing that dictates when we're supposed to be asleep and not is our internal biological clock. And in our body, we have our organs have their own small clocks that tells us when it's time to be active and when it's time to be at rest. And all of these organs are being controlled by the big master clock that sits up in the brain. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN. And the SCN operates much of based upon the amount of exposure that the eyes get from sunlight and daylight, where bright light it gives us a signal to be active and in motion during the day, where darkness tells us to be shut down and be in rest. For anyone sitting at home, it's important to know that as we are sitting inside, we only see a 1 to 10%, we only have 1 to 10% access of the daylight that's being offered outside. So if we want to get the most out of the day, we need to step outside as much as we can. Now, another thing we can do to improve our quality of sleep is to stay in motion. There seems to be a bi-directional relationship between sleep and training, where as we do one thing good, it's going to have a positive impact on the other thing. If we sleep well, it's going to have a positive impact on our training, and the other way around. Now, worth noting here is the ones who might experience the most benefits of this are the people who aren't already active. But as well, not only that, but the people who also experiencing more sleep complaints might also be the persons who might benefit more from being active, being more active. And what we know from exercise is that it's also been prescribed as an effective treatment for people with insomnia. So by making sure that we're in motion, we can actually help us sleep. Now, at times when we're tired, we might reach for caffeine. And while it has a clear proven effect to help us keep awake, we also know that it comes with a downside where it negatively impacts our sleep quality. And we know that an average consumption of about 200 milligrams per day is enough for us to see this alteration in our sleep, where we see a direct negative impact on our deep sleep, making sleep more shallow and less restorative. Now, how sensitive you are to caffeine might vary from person to person, but what's worth knowing here is that caffeine has a half-life of about 6 hours, meaning that if you take your last cup of coffee at 9 o'clock at night, half of the caffeine is still going to be active at 3 o'clock in the morning, again making it harder for you to might fall asleep. Alcohol, on the other hand, is something that calms us down. It's a sedative substance. And while alcohol might make it easier for us to fall asleep, it does also, as it starts to break down and metabolize in our body, the effects of it starts to wear us off. So we might be facing more problems with staying asleep after a night we've taken a few glasses or so. What we know about alcohol and sleep quality is that it also has a negative impact on our sleep. And it's been reported that upwards of only 1 glass of wine is enough to see these effects. So when the sleep matters the most, make sure that you're staying off that extra glass or so. Now, if you want to improve your sleep, here's a few tips that you can think about. First off, try to create a sleep schedule that's based off of how you are working, how you're feeling. Whether you'll be a night owl or an early bird, try to create a sleep and wake schedule that fits as much as possible around you, and make sure you stick to it, even on preferably on during the week and on the weekends as well. Try to be outside as much as possible. See if you're able to take another call outside, or take a meeting on the go, and just get outside in the sunlight. If not, see if you can take a 15 or 30-minute walk during lunch. Anything you can do to be active and be out as much as possible in daylight. As the progressing toward the night, try to keep it cool and dark, especially in your bedroom area, as this may improve the quality of sleep as well. One of the things that usually disrupts people's sleep is bringing this sucker into the bedroom. And we know that when people have their phones with them in the bedroom, usually allows people to sleep, getting into sleep slower. And it also might have an effect on how often they wake up across the night. Now, with that being said, we come to the conclusion of my presentation, and I want to thank you guys for tuning in. If I managed to make any of you guys fall asleep, take that as a big compliment, as I know how important sleep is. And if you have any further questions about sleep or so, please send your question to Molly, and I will do my best to answer them. But with that being said, thanks for tuning in, guys, and make sure that you take your sleep seriously. Thanks.
Thank you a lot, Victor. And now when I have you here on the screen, so you have also promised that you can share this presentation with everyone later. We will post it on eGate, and in the chat box now you can see the page where we will post this. And we will also post this webinar afterwards because it's recorded.